FinOps X Europe. Round of applause for Michael Kearns and Alexander Johansson.
I was actually telling Alex ahead of time that if you're gonna pick a room chaperone, Joe Daly is the room chaperone, and he's really, yeah, he's living up to the billing. So thanks everyone for joining us to talk about focus for data centers, stories from the front lines, and what we're going to talk about today is how UnitedHealth Group, which I was talking about in a minute, uses focus to get an apples to apples comparison of data center spend and usage and cloud spend and usage, but also to inform how to do cloud migrations in a cost effective way. Joining me today is Alexander Johansson, Senior Director of UnitedHealth Group, and I'm going to turn it over to Alex to talk a little bit about UHG.
So before we get started, for those of you that don't know, UnitedHealth Group is the fifth largest company in the United States and plays a big role in the U.S. healthcare system from actually staffing doctors. We have a lot of doctors that work for UnitedHealth Group, providing healthcare benefits for government employees. For employers, you get your benefits from your employers in the US, as well as supporting government medical programs. So kind of end to end. And Optum is part of UnitedHealth Group. We're the technology organization. So our technology is really what powers all of these healthcare services across the United States. If you're in an ambulance in California, we have systems in Azure that are deciding which hospital to send you to make sure there is capacity there. If you are having surgery and your surgeon needs to pull up your radiology image during surgery, they're doing that from our Google Storage bucket. And if you have your heart rate monitor connected with your doctor or with your insurance company, that's in sync with our systems in AWS that are aggregating all of that data to help support our wellness programs as we help 133 million individuals in America access healthcare. So we've had a very long cloud journey. We're at probably about year 8 of moving our technologies to cloud, and we really started with a cloud first mindset where we wanted to do all the new things in cloud, but kind of keep our core systems in our data center. And we've built off of that knowledge, really looking at how we normalize the data coming from Azure, from AWS, from GCP, using Focus to be successful with managing our cloud costs. And as we look now to move our data centers to cloud, we're applying all of those same learnings to how can we really do it the same way and get the same visibility and the same confidence, the same transparency in one of the hardest topics over these years. Network egress cost has been the number one concern that comes up every 3 months. There's another issue or an escalation because network costs are the reason we're not going to be successful. And here's all of those learnings kind of going through those conversations. All right. So before we get started, so how can we do this? I think like with a lot of companies that have been doing this for a while, took a lot of inspiration from Capital One, maybe 6, 7 years ago. We bring all of our data together into one cloud account. For us, that's GCP. So we take our normal usage data as well as all of those that metric data that comes out of Azure, AWS, GCP. We've expanded it to do Mongo Atlas and Snowflake. And over the last 2 years, we've also started to bring our on-prem systems the same way. The data coming out of VMware, the data coming out of Anthos, our Kubernetes solution, and our storage solutions. We bring all of that data together and then we standardize it using Focus. So everything looks and feels the same way, which allows us to continue to reuse all of our systems to the right of that. When we add Kubernetes, we can take advantage of all of the reporting that we already have because we're using this common format. And now that we standardize it, this now makes it easy for us to iterate quickly, to iterate with partners like Virtasant or NetApp, and being able to try things out or get the value of all of these capabilities, as well as our own internal use cases. It's how engineers engage with our FinOps platform and get those recommendations. It's how finance does long range financial planning. We're even using the data today with our real estate services to model out what does a future data center look like in cloud.
And now, obviously, there's a lot of choices between the cloud native tooling, third party tooling. Kind of what drove you to want to build your own and kind of integrate in this way rather than buy something off the shelf?
Yeah, it's having all the data in one place, so you could really do one cloud really well. You can maybe do two clouds really well. When you want to do 10 things and make it consistent, we've kind of found the best option was to reuse our data pipelines in our own cloud ecosystem. All right, so let's talk about networking. So when we think about network costs, it's very different when we think about it in our data center than in cloud. When we're in our data center, we're thinking about the network pipe. How big is the pipe? The pipe that runs across the data center, that pipe that might connect our two data centers. We have one in Chaska and Elk River, Minnesota. They are kind of two zones in our equivalent. It's really about making sure the pipes are the right size. Once you have the pipes at the right size, you can actually share that very differently between workloads. So if you have a very noisy customer, a customer that needs a lot of data, you can let your customer have the full size of those pipes and maybe slow down your backup. So you have a lot of ability to burst or to flex. The downside of this then becomes noisy neighbor. So it's great until you have two customers who want data at the same time. Then you'll hear things around noisy neighbors where there's only such a big pipe. If you need two pipes worth of capacity, it's not going to be there, but generally you could size it pretty well. This is also something that we optimize very heavily. So when you're focusing on networking in a data center, you're spending a long time and you're building for a 10-year vision of what you're going to have in your data center. One of those considerations is how do we really optimize it? So backing up all of our data between two data center ends up costing us dollars. It's very cost effective when you size those pipes to be what you need and share them across all your use cases.
And and when looking at network costs or any cloud on or on-premise costs, kind of shared cost allocation is notoriously difficult, especially on-prem where the data isn't as available as it in cloud. Like, were there any areas where it was particularly hard to identify the network costs or quantify them?
Yeah, it's all the things that network uses that you don't realize. A recent one is storage. So it turns out we use 12 petabytes of storage to store all the network packets for inspection and security reasons. So you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, my network costs include a whole lot of storage that's sitting over here. That was a big surprise. Wow. So then we look at cloud, and cloud treats networking very differently. So cloud vendors have many dozens or hundreds of very large pipes that they're sharing across their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of customers. So their business model isn't about having the right size of pipes, it's by charging customers for the water that's flowing through those pipes to both to recover their costs and incentivize the right behavior. And it's no surprise, Cloudflare has a great article that compares their cost switching from AWS egress to their own data centers. It looks to be one of the highest margin services. So cloud vendors are making the most amount of profit off of those egress costs. Also, as you get into it and look at the data in the focus format, I'm very happy for subcategories in 1.1. That was a big ad that I'm excited for. Sometimes you'll have network costs hidden in different places, or those network costs will behave differently. So if you're using a storage account, network costs are going to appear different or behave differently than if you're using a database service. And then when you use that database service, if you turn on active or turn on a DR feature, you can actually see your network costs greatly increase. We have the highest cost between our inner zones, so not between regions, not to the internet, but the cost to replicate data within one region between two zones is our highest egress cost at UnitedHealth Group. There's also a huge scale and opportunity to spend a lot. We've done a full cloud to cloud data replication exercise, and you can tap about $10,000 a second of network cost. So there isn't a service limit or a quota like you will have in other services. You can just use it, and you could spend $300 million a year if we were just to continue to replicate the same exercise. A lot of opportunity for spend.
Yeah, and I think this is for us kind of whenever we're talking to organizations around the world. I think this is actually probably the most unexpected or probably the source of the greatest surprise. Because I think a lot of people, when they think about whether it's moving to the cloud or even kind of net new provisioning, when you're working in a data center, there's so much stuff you do from a network perspective that's free and you don't think about. And as Alex mentioned, kind of you move to the cloud and all of a sudden, first of all, everything you do has an incremental cost to it. But second of all, high margin service means high cost. And so this is an area that I think more often than not kind of causes surprise.
Cool. So when you look at your focus data, where are you going to see all of these network costs that we're talking about? And there's kind of the first one, I call it the obvious bucket, the Azure Virtual Network, VPCs, and VNets. These will have things like egress, cross region, zone, cross zone, egress costs. Those are going to be very cleanly represented. The other thing, though, that you got to pay attention to are the different network services. So everyone that has a data center also has a firewall. They'll typically also have an API gateway. They will also have load balancers. So we kind of call these our network PaaS services. So when we think about the cost of network, it's the VNet plus all these network services that we have to buy or use to make these systems talk to each other. In the third area, and you'll see this, you'll find some services will have their own bandwidth costs. So if you're using Azure Storage or S3, our third biggest sub SKU there is actually bandwidth. So we will spend, first you pay for the storage, and you pay for the API transactions, and then you pay for the replication bandwidth. And a lot of different services will have additional SKUs that are recovering or representing those egress costs. And then most interesting is we started to bring in other services like Mongo Atlas and Snowflake. And it continues to get even more complex. Where having a standard like Focus makes it easy and effective to try to make sense of it quickly. So as we continue to lean in, as more of those solutions that we were using in our data center now become available as services in the cloud, we're paying extra attention to how egress is going to appear as we go to other service providers.
When I know that, obviously you operate at tremendous scale and you're aggressively moving everything to the cloud and you're using a wide range of services, I think, as we can see here. What, as you went through this from a cloud network perspective, what was like a surprise that you wish you would have known about ahead of time that to kind of, as you move stuff to the cloud, caught you by surprise or
Yeah,
caught you off guard?
ingress isn't always free. So some class, some service providers will charge you for ingress and egress. Thank God we had good visibility. We'll talk about that example later. But that was really the big surprise that you come in thinking you know how it's all going to work. You've been doing this for 6 years, and then you find out your biggest bill today was your ingress cost into a database.
Yeah, ingress is not always free.
So now that we had this good grounding in our network costs and cloud and years of looking at it, forecasting it, bringing transparency to it, optimizing it, we tried to take these learnings to create a model to kind of look at this side by side as we went from doing new things in cloud to actually migrating major systems from our data center to cloud. And we've broken the cost down into these three buckets. The first one, we call it the next unit cost. So when you have a data center, you're typically going to have server racks, and every server rack is going to have its own dedicated set of networking equipment that connects the rest of that rack to the rest of the data center. We call that our next unit cost, and we bundle it with our vCore cost. So say we have a server rack for virtual machines, it might cost us $20 per core for that virtual machine, and it'll cost us another $2 per core to have the networking within that. So we embed that in our internal chargebacks for virtual machines. It's just kind of part of the cost of having these virtual machines is their dedicated network appliances. Now, the second category is all of the other network stuff that sits. So when you have a data center, you're going to have internet towers, you're going to have racks of switches to connect to other switches, you're going to have lines that go to your telecom providers. These costs we bundle together into an annual budget. It's tens of millions of dollars. And then we divide that cost up across all of our other infrastructure. For us, it's about 3 to 4%. I think this year it's 3.5%. So we have now $22 per vCore when we have the VM in the rack. Then we had another 66 cents, which is the 33% extra to cover all of our network enablers. And that gives us a full picture of the traditional network costs. But then going back to those services, now there's another bucket. So we have major functions inside of our technology org to provide load balancers, to provide API gateways, and so forth. We bucket these into individual systems. So we'll have a API gateway budget or bucket. It'll be $5 or $6 million, and we'll just divide that up across our businesses. We'll have business one, you get paid 2 million of our API gateway costs. Business two and three, you each have to put in $1 million, and that kind of gives us some visibility into our total cost of networking, and then looking at how those will change as we go to cloud.
So obviously, I think this stuff is. I think in the cloud it's really easy because the cloud providers kind of give you that stuff broken down this way. But on prem, I think typically people just have broad generalizations and just kind of somewhat arbitrarily spread costs across. But you do it more precisely and more at a more granular level. How much effort is it kind of on an ongoing basis to maintain this? Is it something that's automated, or does this just a lot of manual work? How does that work?
Yeah. So I think it's a bit more manual than automated. So we can, and it's really about explaining the change. So when you get to the end of the year, and now things are really different. We end up spending a lot of time not knowing what it costs. So it went from 5 million to 6 million for the API gateway. We can see those numbers very easily. But now everyone wants to know, why is it 6 million? What went up? What changed? So we end up spending a lot of time trying to rationalize or understand as we create these cost buckets, why do they change, and then try to improve our process so that that becomes easier and more understood.
And what about we've talked about this in the past, but did you ever have any kind of allocation issues where maybe you had an idea of how to allocate it at first, and then kind of based on usage patterns, et cetera, you had to adjust?
Yeah, so we tried to go really hard on the cloud model originally with our API gateway as an example. So we knew we had this $5 million worth of cost, but we also had really good metrics. We knew exactly how many API transactions we were making. We're like, hey, we have a perfect API unit. We call it the API read unit, and you pay per API transaction. So we said, hey, it's going to be a trillion API transactions, $5 million. It's like 5 cents per thousand. That's kind of our magic model. So it was a great idea and it worked really well for the first 3 to 4 months until we launched a major expansion of our digital properties and we doubled the number of API transactions we were making, but we didn't double the cost. So all of a sudden we worked so hard, got everyone bought in on this cloud-like model for our API gateway. But the reality was the cost did not go up and we ended up charging our business $5 million more than it cost us because we tried to have this very clever, very cloud-like model.
Which I guess if you're a cloud provider, that's called profit.
Yeah.
But
So now, with this understanding, every 3 months we still have a red alert fire drill that we're moving this thing to cloud, and network costs are going to kill the budget. Cloud is too expensive, and it's all because of networking. And almost always, and I'd say today, it's always been an overstated concern. And the biggest one is really having optimized your resiliency for a data center. So something we see very frequently is a lot easier to make a full backup of your database than to do something more sophisticated within the database technology like an incremental backup. So teams are very used to just doing a full backup every day, 40 days, 45 days, 50 days. And then you try to do that in cloud, and now you're paying for a lot of cost concerns. Like, oh no, we need $1 million a month in egress to make the same availability standards. The other one was that apples to oranges comparison. So in the previous slide, I was showing that next unit cost. So the big question is, when this moves to cloud, what costs are going to go away? It's like, well, the next unit cost is going to go away. We won't need the server rack, but the internet tower is still going to cost what it costs. The API gateway is still going to cost what it costs. So we had a lot of trouble convincing folks that we had to solve these problems differently, not because of what was going to go away in the data center, but what was going to go into cloud as our measure. And also, teams that work in networking are very used to big, long, expensive projects. So I think our smallest network project, last year, we had a $20 million cloud network uplift program. It's 20 million bucks to interconnect our clouds with lines and everything. And it's going to take a full year. It ended up being 3 months and $6 million because in cloud you can automate it, you can write infrastructure as code, and it was just so 6 months later, like, hey, we have 14 million in savings. You didn't need to spend all 20. This is kind of the circle of comparison. And then we also have our internal app team. So not only do we optimize our infrastructure for the data center, but when app teams don't have a constraint around networking, they will integrate with each other in inefficient ways. We have a lot of applications that instead of integrating through APIs, will just copy all their data over to each other every day. That's not the best practice, not alone for just networking, but for a lot of reasons. And those are the things that when we find them, we help address them and work with the teams to find the right path, the cloud right path to their migration.
well, I'm sure people in the room can relate to this, but I think especially in larger organizations, but I think any organization has human beings in it, which are most or all at this point for now. Um, it you get these kind of, you mentioned overstated concern, and you get these things where it's like the first one happens and there's some kind of network blip, but it goes away and everyone's like, see, cloud's 3 times more expensive, like cancel the migration program. How do you manage those perceptions so as not to kind of either kill momentum or kind of let kind of incomplete understanding derail kind of a strategic objective?
Yeah, one of our unique opportunities that we had done so many kind of cloud initiatives the right way, the cloud right way. So we have had multiple years of only cloud native technologies turning themselves off over the weekends. We had a lot of experience doing cloud right. And then we started to migrate the old stuff. So as soon as something comes along and it's never going to work in cloud this way, it's not that we're saying there's a better way of doing it. We just say, well, 100 applications haven't had this issue. Really? You're going to be the first one? So just the peer pressure of then being challenged to make sure you're not escalating the first problem unnecessarily. It brings a lot of accountability when we have such a deep kind of set of experience doing this for years.
And how important in that is kind of executive communication and executive visibility to success?
Oh yeah, that's also key across every level. Really understanding that there is a right way of doing it, and we have a lot of great success. And we were talking recently. We do a lot of optimization reporting in our FinOps platform. Executives love it. We have over 90% of our recommendations are closed within 90 days. Really good, successful metrics. But CIOs got tired of the success metrics. Like, Alex, you keep coming to us every month and saying we're doing a great job and saving millions of dollars. I need more. It's harder to hold my teams accountable. So they actually asked for a savings missed report. So they don't want to, like, even if we're closing it in 90 days, tell me how much we've lost in the first 22 or 23 days. I want that to be at the top of my dashboard, not how much I've saved. We got it. That'll work. But I need a more impactful measure because we've kind of gotten to the state, and we get really strong leadership buy-in with that level of enthusiasm for doing cloud and doing cloud right.
Yeah, I wish everyone had that level of enthusiasm.
All right. So it doesn't always go well, and this is really where having a visibility with focus is key to making network costs a non-issue or being able to intercede early. Because at the end of the day, there will be mistakes and there will be issues. Um, but really monitoring your data, bringing transparency to it, and actually operationalizing that, you will find the issues and then you can fix the issues. Most people look at the cloud budget as a monthly expense. So if you could find it on the third day, work with the team, have a plan, you have a good 40 days before anyone gets in trouble. We've always been able to reconcile expectations within that. And what you're actually looking at is one of our migrations this summer that moved from an on-prem database to a cloud database that has ingress charges. And over the course of a couple months here, their ingress costs went from $900 a day, $400 a day to $15,000 a day of ingress costs. We found it, we're kind of, it's burning hot. We're talking to the team the day it hit 15,000. We made it a big issue with them and we were able to work through it. And now they're back down to about $300 a day. So it's really about finding it early and finding every opportunity to make changes. And what we've seen is that we've always been able to when it comes to networking. So we have multiple very large systems. So we stream terabytes of data from GCP into Azure and AWS every day because that's where we have our central streaming backend, and then we have to connect to all of our other systems in cloud. You can have compression at multiple stages of these kind of data transfers. Typically, look at 3 options or more at every step of communication. By compressing data and using good architectures as you're moving it, it has eliminated our network costs. Logging is another one. So our Splunk team will report 400 terabytes a day of logs, and we have like 4 gigabytes of logs in our S3 bucket every day. So as long as you architect it well, compress, pack, and use all of the technology that are available, we haven't yet had a network issue, a cost issue. The only times they do come up is when a customer has a requirement. Oh, but our customer contract says we must give them an uncompressed CSV file. I was like, well, yes, that's a terabyte of data. There's nothing else you could do about it unless you get the customer to accept a zip file instead. Like those are the kinds of one-offs that we will talk about. And the last thing, it's really the success that we've had in our cloud journey overall, is take every opportunity to modernize. The lift and shift, and shine. There is always going to be issues, especially in networking costs, when you're taking something optimized for the data center and running it in cloud. And when I kind of think about the key sniff test for me is, are we doing something that's separating compute and storage? Are you able to tweak your storage different than your compute? If so, you're probably using a technology that's going to be good on the network side. Are you just moving to a giant proprietary database on a virtual machine that's probably going to have some issues unless you think about it a little bit more? So just really challenging teams and then using all of the success we've had so far to make it clear you're going to be the first team that doesn't modernize. You really want to be the first team and then have all those first team problems, or can you just kind of do it the right way as everyone's been doing it so far?
Show of hands, who's ever heard lift and shift and shine before? Has anyone ever heard that before? What does that mean?
So you lift and shift. So everyone knows lift and shift is bad, but you do it anyways, and then you shine it afterwards. You fix the issues,
Okay.
lift and shift, and then oh yeah, we shine it.
Oh, polishing the
Yeah, lift
yeah.
and shift,
Okay.
polishing the workload.
So, learn something new every day. So on that topic, you know, it, and lift and shift and shine, I think probably most people would agree that's probably the most common path to cloud migration, and then kind of figure it out once the shine wears down, sort it out later. But how do you? I know a lot of what you and your team have done is gotten people to be proactive. So how do you get teams to be proactive and actually in their migration strategy, in their migration plan, and kind of in execution, do it in a way where you don't carry the problem, either if there are problems, you don't carry it over, or kind of more along the lines of what we're talking about is, look, in the cloud, kind of certain paradigms are infinitely more expensive.
Mhm.
How do you get people to do kind of to be cost aware and take action ahead of migration?
Yeah, so I think the key that I've seen work there is actually separate out the finances for a second, because there's kind of generally a maturity of folks learning about cloud, and I'm going to borrow a term that was really popular like 4 or 5 years ago. So you have DevOps, is those are starting point. You got to build something on cloud, and you want to do it with automation now. You don't need to wait for things infrastructure to be provisioned. That's DevOps. And then you start getting things in cloud, and all these cloud security tools find vulnerabilities really, really quickly.
Yeah.
For some reason, we have all these vulnerabilities in cloud that we never had on prem.
Yeah.
But so then you had DevSecOps. So now you have teams focused on reducing all of these vulnerabilities, and then it came in the financial side, DevSec, FinOps. So when we come to teams, we're like, well, if you do it right, you're almost also going to have a really good time automating your deployment, so you could just don't have to do anything manual. And it's gonna be very easy to close all your vulnerabilities, and you're gonna show your boss you're saving, 2/7 of your bill because you're turning everything off on the weekend. So by combining that value proposition, not just the financial side, which hopefully everyone cares about, but when you're getting yelled at by security, it's always going to be priority two, and helping them do cloud right and get all of the value across what they need to do.
I guess then they can also put DevSec FinOps on their LinkedIn profile too. So that's a bonus. What um y- kind of, I think most people think that certainly I think the typically pattern I've seen is, when you move to the cloud, it's 2 to 3x more expensive,
Mhm.
like generally speaking. What have you seen kind of with what you've been doing and all the kind of proactive work you've been doing and getting visibility on kind of before it moves over?
Yeah, so we've seen, so yes, it is 2 to 3 times more expensive. We have and with a lot of butts, but 7 butts. That's all
Yeah.
focus on the top two. And it's not just us, but we've even bought companies that are in the middle of their migration. We integrate, and they're like, oh, this is expensive. Couple things really jump out as we've dug into those, and the short answer is on an apples to apples basis, it is cheaper if you turn it off on the weekends. When folks are comparing an on-prem virtual machine to one in cloud, as soon as you delete hours of runtime every week, you're going to find out the cloud is cheaper. But with cloud comes two opportunities. The first one is it's really easy to enable higher resiliency, higher operational features and requirements. We had a big incident last summer. So we had a lot of cloud workloads. We had one team that wasn't doing active. They dropped their database, and it stopped people from being able to check in at the doctor for about 4 hours during a US day. That's a huge outage for us. To eliminate that, actually, we should be active everywhere. So we turned it on everywhere. Our cloud bill went up by about $2 million a month by turning on active everywhere. But we haven't had an issue since. So we have a very clear correlation to, yep, we doubled the size of a lot of these databases, but we haven't had an operational issue uh, in over a year now. Where's the what?
Yeah.
And then the other one is how easy it is to do new features in cloud. So the other major driver is folks that are releasing new features and functionalities. A really notorious one for us is in our pharmacy business. So we do a lot of pharmacy benefits and filling prescriptions. So doctor orders it. If you don't know, in the U.S., your pharmacy benefits will actually pay the pharmacist while you're there. So when they're going through the checkout, we have to be able to pay the pharmacist within 5 seconds of completing an order. So it's a very fast transactional process. They came out with a really cool feature on top of this data, which was to find the cheapest drug price within 10 miles. So as soon as you pull up your phone, like, hey, did you know this is actually $25 cheaper over in this pharmacy over here? A lot of checks have to happen, but it's a really cool feature just to tell people you could just save $20 now, go down the street. That drew a lot of costs because we were running lots of calculations, lots of geolocation, triangulation exercises, doing lots of lookups. So we saw a huge spike in cost, but it was correlated to this very, very valuable feature. And the feature was so valuable, they put it on every single digital experience. As soon as you would call into the call center, every agent would see this information. As soon as you would log into any digital property, they would warm the data so it was cached and ready to serve on the moment's notice if you got landed on the right page. So it was such a successful business initiative. Got so many people to save money at the pharmacy, but it cost us $1 million in our cloud bill, and it wasn't obvious why this is more expensive right away.
Awesome. All right. I think with that, we'll open it up to the room for questions. And I think Joe is. What is that?
Sketchbox.
Oh,
Now, I'm starting to break the box. If I throw you the box, ask your question, put it next to your mouth, see how much better that sounds. Versus this. This doesn't really work very well. So and then also turn it down when you're right. Who has a question? Anyone? Don't be intimidated by the box.
Hi, I'm Dave. Uh, how does the renewing or changing of hardware when you have added to the cost space for on-prem uh, uh, data centers, how did it affect? I mean, suppose after 5 years you have to renew the hardware again, and that costs some thousands or million dollars. How do you come to this unit economics for that amount to, yeah.
Yeah. So the question: how do we kind of decompose the fixed costs of buying infrastructure versus all the other costs? So as we put these buckets, I'll just kind of give a approximate. If we say we have $10 million worth of cost, about 2.5 million, a quarter of that cost will be the bare metal infrastructure. Another 2.5 will be what we call data center facility costs. That will be the building, the electricity, and then the other half cost is going to be software, people cost to support and maintain. So we do look at it very closely. Every asset is modeled out in there, and then we do play. But because it's only a quarter of the cost, we don't make it a major decision in our cloud migrations. We try to get those migration roadmaps and then strategize how do we buy the least amount of infrastructure to replace what we have. So it hasn't been a major role. So we measure it, we look at it very closely, but we just kind of bundle it into the total cost and don't make it a major difference in process.
Two more questions. Uh, Sorry. One is related to the focus data. So you said that you are heavy on AWS. Let's talk about AWS then. AWS is releasing the focus data little later, and they have their own CUA data, CUA 2.0 now, which is little advanced, which is having more data than Focus 1.0. We don't know when we will be getting the Focus 1.1. So how are you coping up with that? I mean, previously you should have some other billing mechanism as well.
Mhm.
So you are now moving, or you have moved to Focus. So you might be missing some pieces. So how are you connecting those dots?
Yeah, so we kind of do two things. So we normalize everything. If you look at, we use something closer to Focus 1.1 because that subcategory is super valuable. So excited to see subcategory and 1.1. We were essentially Focus plus a column. So now it's there. So we essentially standardize on that first. When we think of most of our business processes, they don't care about the extra information that's coming across. So how do we do our chargeback, showback, managing our RIs, making decisions between SKUs or pricing? So there's most of our use cases can be fully satisfied, and we get a lot of reuse. So by reusing just the standard columns, we actually added Mongo Atlas and Snowflake. I think it was in a month. So we were able to just say, oh, let's get this data, let's shape it like Focus, and it just appeared as another CSV in our dashboard. It went from having AWS, Azure, GCP to then Snowflake, then Mongo Atlas in a month. Get a lot of velocity, and then everything reuses that standard. But then you will find some niche situations if you're looking to like pick between Graviton and not, or like Intel and AMD. There's a lot of nuances that you don't find. As I was going to do a couple suggestions for how to do bandwidth. I didn't get it in time, but like bandwidth today sits under a storage cost for storage. So there's always going to be improvements to Focus. So I always look at those other columns, creating those opportunities, those unsolved problems that maybe iterates into a future Focus version.
So right now you're maintaining both the existing one and the new Focus one.
Yeah, we drop the columns. So the short answer is we will drop the columns, and we will always have it in the source data. So if we do need to use those columns, we have them for our ad hoc analytics. But all of our business processes are going to normalize to the Focus standard so that we are not being too coupled to what one vendor is going to do.
Okay, and the last question. So you said that lift and shift and shine, and after that, it was causing $15,000 per month, and you have reduced it to $3,000, and mostly that was on the network cost. So did you re-architect the whole ecosystem, or how did you achieve that?
Yeah, so there are two different. So lift, shift, and shine. And the example I brought was actually per day. So and that was
Okay.
an app that was actually moving to. They're already using a document database on prem, and they were moving to a PaaS service. So that was unrelated to lift and shift. It was really using the right architecture without compression. So all they needed to do is turn on that compression feature that they didn't turn on prem because it was never a problem. They turned on the compression feature, and that cost issue went away. The lift, shift, and shine is a bit different in the situations there are you're moving. We see those workloads move, and then to maintain that high availability, They will have duplicate instances in multiple regions without any sort of elasticity. They will be replicating data excessively. So that we see issues with lift and shift, but it wasn't specific to my example.
Okay, thank you.
So there's an inherent difference, and I don't know if you expose those, but when you see room for optimizations for right sizing in the cloud, and you act on that, you see a drop in costs. But if you do that for your own premise environment, you still have the same rack that you're paying for. So there's an inherent difference in terms of incentive.
Mhm.
It's something that we face, and I'd be interested to hear if that's something that you faced and how you solved it.
Yeah, it's actually the most contentious issue. I was just talking to Mike about it. So we have what's called a double bubble problem. So everything we've moved to cloud so far has been new development work. So, the business that I want to get all these cool cloud features in the new thing we're building. Now it's more tech saying, we got to get the rest of these things to cloud now. And now we have a more transparent double bubble issue to the business because they're going to be paying for the things on-prem as well as the things in cloud. So one of the ideas is we'll just cover the cloud cost for the first year, right? So, the thought is we'll pay for the double bubble. But it's like, wait. Instead of just giving the business a check for 50 million that we have to solve differently, why don't we push for a right sizing effort on-prem? And it was something that wasn't very popular for that very reason, because if we reduce the number of vCores the business is paying for, we're going to lose $20 of our chargeback per vCore, but the cost isn't going to go away right away. So that's one of the so we haven't solved it yet, but that's one of the strategies that we've now committed to the business of not impacting them with the double bubble. My hope is to use that opportunity to kind of sneak in an on-prem right sizing for VMs instead of just kind of making it a cloud problem, make it more of a data center problem that we have to solve instead of the cloud kind of chargeback problem.
Yeah, and I'd add to that just I think one is, there's still value in doing it ahead of migration just because then it'll be cheaper. You won't have any kind of incurred waste in the migration side. But also, even if it's going to stay there, you're inevitably going to have to continuously refresh hardware. So at some point, if you right size when you do like you're stuck with those boxes, but when you have to refresh, maybe you can go with 2/3 of what you had. So there's still, even if you're going to stay, if you pay attention to kind of refresh cycles, like you can just buy less when you refresh. So even data center capacity isn't it's static in the short term, but not in the medium or long term.
One other actually idea I'd pull on where I see the most traction is when we also have vCore licensing. So you're not just running the infrastructure, but you have software license. Those things are really painful in cloud. So if you can sync it up, not just with the infrastructure cost, but the infrastructure and the reduced number of vCores when you deploy it, that's another test we'll find out because we have some major renewals coming next year. We're going to see if we can we can use that as some additional support to push for that kind of negative chargeback impact.
I was gonna say anyone who's doing VMware negotiations right now probably knows that
Hence my
it's
question.
going to be more impactful moving that cost item will be more pronounced than it was 6 months ago. Yeah. Sorry to anyone broad comment or anything.
You guys talked about double bubble just now. Can you explain a little bit more about the levers that you're using, and Alex, in your conversations with leadership about how to mitigate that impact?
Yeah. So how do we address the double bubble impact? So we put together a big business case for our cloud migration journey because we have a very big data center and leaders want to see that 5 years from now we're going to be okay. Very leaders, we're break even at the end. So we think about our cloud migration 5 years getting out of the data center. It's not a huge savings play for us. It's an operational resiliency, security improvement, technology PLM and lifecycle. That's the opportunity of it. But then there's those short-term issues of double bubble. So we're kind of solving it with a few ways. So if you're doing a big cloud migration, talk to your cloud vendors because you could save money on your current cloud bill with new discounts and credit. So that's the first step. How do we get the incentives from the cloud vendor partners to create room in our budget for the new stuff? Second one is optimization. So now we actually have an enterprise-wide cloud optimization MBO. So one of the reasons we get 90% closure is because people are doing the right thing. The other reason is because they have a savings quota they got to meet anyway, so it's part of their goal. So then we save a lot on cloud. We're actually taking out 2/3 of our cloud growth is actually going away from our existing cloud footprint as we get better discounts and better optimization. And then that last third is what we're then still struggling with to see how do we squeeze out the right workloads at the right time, make sure we are buying infrastructure the right way to get that last third so we could kind of stay even over this journey and hopefully pick up a little. I think we're looking at about a 5% or so improvement in our annual run costs once we're all done.
Thank you. Hi there. In your cloud journey on the current, have you modernized anything? Have you, when you first went onto the cloud, have you been able to modernize any application services in the current, because there's new offerings all the time. Have you done any of that yet?
Yeah, we actually we've done a lot of modernization, and we have two kind of key examples or data points. First off, 85% of our workloads in cloud are using containers. 10% of the workloads in our data center are using containers. So just the fact of getting teams out of long-lived virtual machines and into containers is just a sign of that modernization. And we're really benefiting from the fact that we were moving our new development work anyway. So if we're going to build something new, you might as well do it the cool, fun way, not the old way. So that was one big opportunity. The other one is really how we modernize given our big mainframe dependency. So we have a huge mainframe dependency, the same you're going to see from banks or other or airlines. We came up with a very kind of modern data strategy. So instead of trying to stay coupled to our mainframe with direct integrations, we use streaming technologies to get the data out of our mainframe. In the short term, that was a full copy of the data in the mainframe to cloud in near real time. But that sort of decoupling and modernization brought with it a lot of resiliency, which is our main driver, but then opportunity to modernize. So no one had to be dependent on the mainframe, the long change cycles and all of that they could build their little features and functionalities on top of our transactions in cloud the right way. And that led to kind of the opportunity that we've seen to modernize most of our workloads. We have very few, I think less than 5% of the things we have in cloud aren't, I'll call it the cloud right way. We have very few workloads there that aren't modernized.
Thank you.
Hi there. What tooling do you use to manage your inventory and cost, like an Apptio tool or a VMware tool? Like, what tooling do you use?
Yeah, so for cloud, we've built mostly our own. Part of that is because we started doing this early before a lot of those companies, and also the need to bring in metrics data. So if you saw the keynote from Capital One, is like we were building optimization alerts before they were a cool thing, and but then we just partner with folks like Virtasant. So you get to a point where there's so many things we could be building. If you can go buy some really great optimization alerts, the value proposition for most partners that make this event possible is really great. Like, here, we'll save you $1, pay us a nickel. Those kind of conversations are really easy and very effective. So that's where if I'm looking for partners, it's looking for partners that come not just with a tech platform that we can use, but that kind of consultative approach to solving that problem.
Hi, have you had any challenges in like building your cost management for the data center to ensure that you compare apples to apples when compared to the clouds, so that you have all the data properly stored? Have you got maybe some missing data that you noticed during implementation of Focus, that you are missing something in your ITIM data?
So we have a pretty mature internal chargeback process. So when we think about it, we know who owns every virtual machine. We know every gig of storage and who's using it. The big challenges are when we build on top of that. So we definitely know who uses all of our storage, but we also didn't realize that our network team uses the most amount of storage. So our storage is like by a lot, they're the biggest use case of storage in our data center. Those are the things where it's not being charged directly to the business. It gets bundled into our network enabler or otherwise. So that's where it gets challenging, and it's challenging both because if you were to do that in cloud, it would be really expensive. So you have to not just bring it to cloud, but you got to think about how you're going to do this sort of problem differently in cloud, or it's going to be more expensive. 19 or 12 petabytes of high performance storage is expensive. So how do you do this differently? So I think that's where we find things that get buried when you use expensive software is another one. So if you're going to bring your very expensive firewall technology to cloud, it's going to be expensive unless you think about using it differently.
Thanks.
One more question, one last question. Here we go.
You guys talked about migrations specifically, and UHG. There's a lot of apps that are migrating. Can you talk about the lessons learned or pain points that you have from kind of estimating what cloud costs are going to be in conversations with those engineering teams?
Yeah, so I have been estimating cloud workloads for 7 years now. I have never gotten it right, never once. Anyone that says I can explain to you why it's wrong. So I think the big challenge here, and I think the reality that I've never seen a workload that starts down their cloud journey for the first time and doesn't make a major change. We've never seen one app go to the cloud. It's always been 3 apps turn into 2 apps. Oh, and then they add this cool cheapest drug price everywhere feature. So we haven't, out of all of our migrations, we have over 1,000 applications in cloud today. We have yet to see a very clean example that is this thing on-prem. We know what it would be. We know exactly what 1 GB of data is at every tier. We know exactly what one vCore is in every cloud. It has just never proven itself to be anything besides a swag. And then the cool thing is the engineering teams, the product teams that are doing it can make changes to influence it back to that shifting left. The earlier we get involved, so when we start a migration, we will forecast that migration. And then we'll start monitoring their usage on day one against that forecast. And they'll come in way below and like, hey guys, you're coming in way below. Do you want to tell your boss the good news? I'm like, not yet. Okay, we'll come back in a week. Hey, you're gonna tell your boss the good neuse yet? It's like, well, not yet. It's like, well, now it's budgeting season. We either got to tell them the good news or not have good news. And like, okay, let's tell them the good news. So they're getting engaged with teams and applying the same sort of transparency that we have to our workloads in cloud, to our workloads that are moving to cloud, has really been key to being able to manage that. I think wherever we've had an issue, as long as it's a small issue and you talk to finance when you find it, right when the engineers are doing it, we've always been able to reconcile. It's actually one of our other cool metrics. More than 90% of our anomalies are accepted by finance on the first conversation. We just document why, oh, we added 2 customers, or like, oh, we changed direction here. We document it, get that little check mark from finance and move on. Instead of waiting till the end of the year to tell finance you have a $20 million problem, we just have $210,000 problems that have all really good reasons and were talked about in that transparency. All right. Let's give a big round of applause.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. I hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoy sharing all of these amazing FinOps stories, best practices, and expertise. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and leave comments and questions for our speakers. Check out more FinOps X content on our YouTube channel. We appreciate the support.